I never forget the sound of laughter. Not the sweet kind, not the kind that warms a room, but the sharp, mocking kind that slices through your chest and leaves a mark that years of success can't erase. This morning, as sunlight poured across the glass walls of my corner office, that sound came back to me. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse, took a slow breath, and smiled at the irony. They had laughed at me once, called me naive, irrational, even crazy. Yet here I am, the woman they swore would fail, looking out at a Manhattan skyline I now call my own. The buzz of my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. My cousin Emily. My stomach tightened before I even opened the message. Hey, could we talk? It's important. I set the phone down on my oak desk, tracing the grain with my fingertip, remembering the last time we spoke. Her smirk, the roll of her eyes, the way she'd said, "That little investment of yours? It's a waste of money." Now, she was reaching out.
Why?
Curiosity? Regret? Maybe desperation. I leaned back in my chair, the soft leather hugging my shoulders, and closed my eyes for a moment. The past wasn't gone. It was circling back, knocking at my door, demanding to be confronted. And this time, I wasn't the same girl they mocked. I was 21 the night everything fell apart. Back then, I was just Anna, the girl who still lived in her parents' small suburban house in Ohio, who worked part-time at a diner and carried around dreams far too big for her family to tolerate. The living room smelled faintly of popcorn and detergent that night, the TV humming in the background as my parents, my brother Jason, and my cousin Emily sat around. I had gathered enough courage to finally tell them. I wanted to put my savings, nearly everything I had, into a small, unfamiliar startup I had been researching obsessively for months. I remember my voice shaking as I explained the potential, the technology, the future I could see so clearly. My hands trembled against the notepad where I had written bullet points, each word underlined twice. Silence. Then laughter. Not gentle laughter. Cool. Jason slapped his knee, choking on a soda, while Emily leaned back on the couch, smirking. "Anna, you're insane," she said flatly. "That's not investing. That's throwing money into a wishing well." My father's voice was worse than the laughter. "Stop chasing nonsense. You need stability, not fairy tales." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to swallow the lump. I wanted to cry, but I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. It was my grandmother, the only one who didn't laugh. She sat quietly in her rocking chair, her frail fingers wrapped around the handle of her cane. When everyone else walked away, still muttering about my stupid gamble, she beckoned me closer. "You hear them now, child," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. "But sometimes, being mocked is proof you're onto something too big for them to understand." She pressed a small, worn silver coin into my hand, a keepsake she had carried for decades. "Hold this when you feel like giving up. Let it remind you that ridicule and genius often look the same at first." That night, I sat on my bed, coin clutched tightly in my palm, listening to their laughter echo in my memory. The humiliation burned. But under the burn, something else was growing. Resolve. I wasn't going to prove them right. I was going to prove myself right. I left Ohio 6 months later with nothing but 2 suitcases, that silver coin tucked into my wallet, and a stubborn fire that wouldn't die. New York was overwhelming at first, the endless noise, the rush of people who didn't even glance at you as they brushed past. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a radiator that groaned all night. It didn't matter. To me, it felt like freedom. During the day, I worked long shifts at a bookstore cafe, smiling at customers while silently calculating how much of each paycheck I could spare. At night, I studied. Finance articles, startup reports, every webinar I could find on the internet. I devoured knowledge, filling journals with scribbled notes, charts, and questions. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when my future was at stake. I wasn't entirely alone. One evening, after a free investment workshop at a community college, a woman named Claire approached me. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes softened by kindness. A former Wall Street analyst turned consultant, She had noticed the determination in my questions. "You've got the hunger most people lose once life beats them down," she said. "Don't waste it. But pace yourself. Ambition without patience burns out." Claire became my quiet mentor, guiding me through mistakes before I made them, teaching me how to analyze risk without fear clouding my judgment. Still, the struggles were endless. I remember nights staring at my cracked phone screen, wondering if I was reckless. Maybe my family had been right. There were weeks when I stretched a single bag of rice for every meal. I painted my nails once, a cheap drugstore red, only to notice chips forming before the end of the week, a reminder that even small luxuries had to wait. But slowly, tiny wins began to bloom. My first investment doubled within a year. I'll never forget the moment I saw the numbers rise on the screen. I gasped so loudly in that cramped studio that my neighbor knocked on the wall. Then came my first client, a timid college student who asked me for advice. I stayed up all night preparing a portfolio, terrified I'd ruin her trust. But when her savings grew, she called me crying with gratitude. That moment mattered more to me than the profit. I never told my family. Online, my posts were vague. A cup of coffee here, a skyline shot there. I let them believe I was barely scraping by. Maybe part of me wanted to keep my world safe from their ridicule until I was strong enough to withstand it. Years blurred together in a rhythm of grind and growth. One client turned into 5. 5 turned into 20. Word spread. Opportunities multiplied. And before I could fully comprehend it, this silly little investment had evolved into something extraordinary. I was no longer the girl mocked in her parents' living room. I was building an empire, quietly, patiently, brick by brick. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The city was shrouded in silver mist, raindrops racing down the windows of my office on the 47th floor. I was reviewing a partnership proposal when my assistant, Daniel, knocked lightly on the door. "There's a family here to see you, Miss Carter," he said, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "They don't have an appointment, but they insisted." My pulse skipped. Family. After years of silence, here they were. "Send them in," I said, smoothing the front of my blazer. The door opened and in walked my parents, my brother Jason, and my cousin Emily. They looked smaller than I remembered, worn by time. Emily's confident smirk was gone, replaced by anxious eyes scanning the room. Their gaze swept over everything: the floor-to-ceiling windows, the marble desk, the abstract art on the walls, the quiet hum of success in every detail. My mother's lips parted, as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. This is your office?" my father finally asked. "Yes," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. "Welcome." Jason muttered under his breath. "Damn." He tried to mask his astonishment, but the crack in his voice gave him away. Emily walked closer, her heels clicking nervously against the polished floor. She picked up a framed magazine cover from my desk, Forbes Women in Finance. Anna Carter, the visionary behind Carter Capital. Her eyes widened. "You're this Anna Carter?" she whispered. I let the silence hang in the air, savoring the weight of the moment. Their disbelief filled the room like oxygen. "You remember that little investment you mocked?" I finally said, my voice steady. "The one you called a waste of money? That was the seed. And now it's worth millions." Jason's jaw tightened. My father shifted uncomfortably, running a hand across his thinning hair. My mother blinked rapidly, tears threatening, but not falling. Emily set the frame back down with trembling fingers. I didn't know," she stammered. "Of course you didn't," I said, softer this time. "I didn't tell you, because you wouldn't have believed me anyway." For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping against the glass. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Anna, we may have been wrong. About a lot of things." The words felt foreign coming from him. Jason avoided my eyes, his pride still wrestling with reality. Emily, however, looked at me with something new, not envy, not disdain, but something closer to awe. "You build all this?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Brick by brick. Client by client. Year by year. I gestured to the office around me. And I did it without your approval, without your support, and in spite of your laughter. The silence stretched again, heavy with the weight of years unsaid. I could see the storm in their faces. Regret, shame, disbelief. They had come expecting to find a struggling dreamer, maybe to offer pity. Instead, they found me powerful, composed, accomplished. And for the first time in my life, they were speechless. I stood, walking slowly toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below, glittering even through the rain. My reflection stared back at me, not the timid girl clutching a coin in her bedroom, but a woman who had carved her own destiny. When I turned back to face them, my voice carried no bitterness, only truth. They mocked my investment. Now it's worth millions. And every laugh, every doubt, every cruel word only fueled me. Their silence was my victory. For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of the reveal still hung heavy in the room, like the last notes of a song refusing to fade. Then my father, who had never once admitted fault in his life, cleared his throat again. "Anna," he began carefully, we could use your help." I raised a brow. "Help?" Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Yeah, things haven't been easy. I lost my job last year. I've been struggling." His voice cracked on the last word. Emily leaned forward, clasping her hands. "I made some bad financial choices. Debt. It's suffocating me." My mother's voice trembled as she added, "We just want to make things right. Maybe start fresh as a family." I studied them silently. Years ago, those words would have cracked me open, desperate for acceptance. But not anymore. Now, the power sat firmly in my hands. "I'm not here to gloat," I began, walking slowly around the desk, my heels clicking against the floor. "But I also won't let history repeat itself. If you want my help, there are conditions." They looked up, startled. "Jason," I said, turning to my brother, "you've spent your life mocking people for chasing dreams, yet you've never chased one yourself. If I help you, it's not just a bailout. You're going back to school. Pick something you're passionate about, commit to it, and stick with it. No shortcuts." His face reddened, but he nodded. "Emily," I continued, locking eyes with her, "your problem isn't just money, it's envy. You've been so busy tearing others down, you never built yourself up. If I help clear your debt, you'll start therapy. Work on the jealousy, the bitterness. Because if you don't change that, no amount of money will save you." Her lips parted as if to protest, but she swallowed hard and nodded slowly. "And you?" I said, turning to my parents. My voice softened, but the firmness remained. "You raised me with stability, yes. But you also raised me with fear. Fear of failing, fear of dreaming too big. If I extend my hand now, it's not just financial. It's emotional. You will stop dismissing people's passions as nonsense. You will support each other, even if you don't understand. Can you do that?" My father's shoulders sagged, and my mother wiped a tear. They both nodded. I took a deep breath, feeling the strength of the moment settle into my bones. "This isn't revenge," I said firmly. "This is growth. For me and for you. But if you break these conditions, if you fall back into old habits, my door closes. Permanently." The room was silent, save for the rain easing into a gentle drizzle outside. For once, they weren't mocking or doubting or laughing. They were listening. And in their faces I saw it. The beginning of change. The weeks that followed felt surreal. For the first time in years, my family didn't approach me with sarcasm or doubt, but with quiet respect. At first, I kept my distance, waiting to see if their promises would last. To my surprise, small changes began to appear. Jason enrolled in a community college program in digital design. He sent me screenshots of his projects, hesitant at first, then proud. For the first time, I saw him not as the brother who mocked me, but as a man trying to rebuild himself. Emily kept her word too. She started therapy. Our conversations became softer, stripped of the sharp edge they once carried. One evening she admitted, voice cracking, "I was jealous, Anna. Jealous that you were brave enough to do what I couldn't." For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her, Only empathy. Even my parents shifted. My father, once rigid and unyielding, listened more than he spoke. My mother began volunteering at a local art center, encouraging young people chasing dreams that once seemed too big. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Late one night, after a long day at the firm, I sat alone in my office. The city glittered beneath me, alive with movement. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the silver coin my grandmother had given me years ago. The metal was cool against my skin, grounding me, reminding me of the girl who once sat on her bed, humiliated but determined. I thought of her, that fragile, trembling version of me, and I whispered, "You did it." Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't from pain this time. They were from gratitude. For the struggle. For the laughter that had once cut me down because it had carved me into steel. For the people who doubted me because they had unknowingly fueled my fire. I stood by the window, coin in my palm, and smiled at my reflection, a woman forged by resilience, softened by compassion, and strengthened by grace. They mocked my investment, I said softly, as if speaking to my younger self, to my grandmother, to the city itself. Now it's worth millions. And so am I.